How did Native Americans survive natural disasters, floods, and storms? How did they survive in difficult conditions, and what did they have to do? You will be surprised to learn the truth. We are used to thinking that modern man, with his technology and satellite weather forecasts, is reliably protected from the elements. We build dams to protect against floods and reinforced houses to protect against hurricanes. But what if I told you that hundreds of years ago, people who had none of these things survived in conditions that were just as harsh and sometimes even harsher, natural disasters? The indigenous peoples of North America lived for centuries in close contact with nature, which was both their home and their greatest challenge. They did not fight the elements. They learned to understand them, speak their language, and move to their rhythm. Their survival depended not on concrete and steel, but on knowledge, collective wisdom, and a unique ability to be part of the world around them, rather than its conquerors. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn how entire peoples predicted hurricanes without weather stations, why their dwellings were sometimes stronger than modern ones, and what collective practices allowed them to emerge victorious from battles with the most destructive forces on the planet. What if I told you that for Native Americans, a hurricane was not just a weather phenomenon? For many tribes, natural disasters were not a chaotic outburst of nature, but a meaningful action of the spiritual world. It was a message, a warning, or a test that required not panic, but respect in the right response. This worldview shaped a completely different attitude toward threats. Instead of panicking about a storm, people listened carefully to the signs that foreshadowed it. They believed that the world around them was alive and constantly sending signals about coming changes. Shamans and elders, who possessed special spiritual experience, played a key role in predicting disasters. They interpreted dreams, visions, and unusual natural phenomena as harbingers of drought, flood, or severe storms. Their word was decisive when it came to deciding whether to evacuate or prepare for a cataclysm. For example, unusual animal behavior or the appearance of certain birds could be considered a serious warning. People believed that animals had a keener sense of perception and were the first to sense the approach of great trouble. This was part of a unified system in which humans did not separate themselves from the surrounding world. Rituals and ceremonies were an integral part of preparing for natural disasters. By performing special rites, people were not so much trying to cancel the hurricane as they were striving to harmonize their relationship with spiritual forces. This helped to strengthen the community spirit and prepare for trials together. This approach did not negate practical actions, but rather served as a powerful motivational basis for them. The belief that their actions had spiritual meaning gave people strength and confidence. They acted not out of fear, but out of a sense of duty to their people and their land. This system was based on centuries of observation and a deep understanding of the interrelationships in nature. What we would today call intuition or folk omens was for them an exact science clothed in spiritual form. It was their way of reading the book of nature. To modern man, this may seem naive, but this approach provided psychological stability. The awareness that what was happening made sense helped to avoid panic. Calmness and clarity of mind were the main weapons in the face of the impending disaster. They did not try to conquer nature, but sought to live in harmony with it. This fundamental difference in worldview was the key to their remarkable resilience. They accepted the power of the elements and sought ways to dodge their blows rather than confront them head-on. Do you think that such a more spiritual attitude towards nature would help modern people? Share your opinion in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how animals became the best forecasters? Long before the advent of weather satellites and barometers, Native Americans developed a sophisticated system of weather forecasting. It was based on what we would today call empirical data, centuries of observations of the sky, plants, and animal behavior. The sky was their main source of information. The shape, color, and direction of clouds could tell an experienced observer about the weather several days in advance. For example, the appearance of certain types of cirrus clouds was considered a sure sign of an approaching storm front. They paid close attention to the wind. Its direction, strength, temperature, and even smell carried important information. A sudden change in wind direction or a sharp increase in wind speed were warning signs that prompted the entire tribe to prepare for the worst. Animal behavior was one of the most reliable indicators. The mass flight of birds, restlessness of livestock, or small animals retreating into their burrows all signaled the approach of a serious storm. Animals, sensitive to changes in atmospheric pressure, became living barometers. Plants could also provide clues. Some flowers closed their buds before rain, and tree leaves could change their position depending on humidity. These seemingly insignificant details added up to an overall picture of impending weather changes. Knowledge about the weather was not a closely guarded secret, accessible only to the select few. These observations were taught from an early age. Every member of the community had to be able to read the signs of nature in order to warn their fellow tribesmen of danger in time. The accumulated experience was recorded in the form of oral traditions, sayings, and omens. This allowed valuable information to be passed down from generation to generation. This is how a collective knowledge base was formed, which worked more reliably than any individual device. For example, the tribes of the Great Plains were well aware of the signs of an approaching tornado, which they called a great whirlwind. The oppressive silence after a strong wind, the specific greenish tint of the sky, and the appearance of a rotating funnel-shaped cloud were signals to immediately seek shelter. They also knew how to predict floods by observing the water levels in rivers and streams in the spring. The speed of snowmelt in the mountains and the intensity of rainfall in the upper reaches of rivers allowed them to assess the risk and migrate to higher ground in advance. This forecasting system was not just a set of omens, but a holistic approach to understanding the environment. It required constant vigilance and deep respect for nature. But what good is the most accurate forecast if your home cannot withstand the elements? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secrets of architecture that was born to move. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the mobile homes of the Great Plains. For the tribes that inhabited the Great Plains, mobility was not just a way of life, but a key survival strategy. Their famous dwelling, the tipi, was not just a tent, but an ingenious engineering solution, perfectly adapted to constant nomadism and sudden threats. The tipi's design was the height of functionality. It consisted of long wooden poles that served as a frame and a covering sewn from treated bison hides. All materials were light and durable, allowing the dwelling to be quickly assembled and disassembled. The secret to speed lay in collective work, which had been honed to perfection. The women of the tribe, who were traditionally responsible for setting up and dismantling the tipi, could roll up an entire camp in a matter of hours. This allowed the entire tribe to evacuate quickly in the event of a flood, prairie fire, or approaching enemy. The poles from the tipi were not simply carried along, but served as the basis for a means of transport, a travois or travois. Two poles were attached to the back of a horse, and a platform was fixed to their ends, on which the rolled-up covering and other belongings were placed. In this way, the house itself became part of the transport system. The tipi was surprisingly resistant to the strong winds that often swept across the plains. Its conical shape provided minimal resistance to air currents. A properly erected dwelling could withstand a storm that would damage a modern tent. The design also included a ventilation system. At the top of the tipi, there was a smoke hole covered by two special valves. By controlling these valves with poles, it was possible to regulate the draft and protect the hearth from rain and wind. When there was a threat of flooding, the solution was obvious: immediate relocation to higher ground. Knowledge of the area passed down from generation to generation made it possible to accurately identify safe places. The tribe did not wait for the water to reach the camp, but acted proactively. This mobility was a philosophy, not just a technical solution. The tribes of the plains did not tie themselves to one place. Their home was the entire steppe, and they easily left their camp to preserve what was most valuable: the lives of their people. Thus, the best protection against the elements was not the strength of the walls, but the speed of their feet. The tipis did not have to withstand the impact of the flood, because by the time the floodwaters arrived, the camp was no longer there. It was a strategy of evasion, not confrontation. This approach demonstrates a deep understanding of their world. The nomads did not try to change nature to suit themselves, but harmoniously fit into its cycles and rhythms. Their architecture was as alive and mobile as life itself on the prairies. What if I showed you a wooden fortress capable of withstanding a hurricane? Unlike the nomadic tribes of the plains, the peoples of the northeastern forests, such as the Iroquois, led a sedentary lifestyle. Their survival strategy was based not on mobility, but on the creation of strong and reliable communal dwellings. The famous longhouses, or gagnottes. The longhouse was a true masterpiece of wooden architecture. Its frame was built from sturdy trunks of young and flexible trees, such as elm. These trunks were dug into the ground and bent to form an arched roof, which made the structure very resistant to wind and snow loads. The walls and roof were covered with large layers of bark, which were carefully laid overlapping, like tiles. This provided excellent waterproofing and protection from rain. The bark was harvested at a certain time of the year, when it was easily separated from the trunk and treated for durability. The dimensions of the longhouse were impressive. It could reach up to 100 meters in length. Several related families lived inside, forming a single clan. Such collective life in one large house promoted unity and mutual assistance during any trials. To protect themselves from strong winds and winter storms, the Iroquois located their villages in strategically advantageous places. These were usually hills protected by forests, but with good access to water. The forest served as a natural barrier that weakened the force of the wind. The design of the longhouse also took into account the harsh winters. Several hearths were located along the central passageway, with smoke escaping through openings in the roof. These hearths heated the huge room, and the heat was retained for a long time thanks to the thick bark walls. When there was a threat of flooding due to the spring snowmelt, the location of the villages on the hills played a key role. The water simply did not reach the settlements. Ancient knowledge of the terrain and the behavior of rivers was the best protection. Thus, sedentary peoples countered the threat of the elements not with speed, but with strength and solidity. Their longhouses were a symbol of stability and collective strength. But how did entire tribes act when the threat became too serious for any shelter? More on this in the next chapter. When natural signs and the predictions of the elders indicated an imminent threat, a well-oiled mechanism of collective evacuation was set in motion. This was not a chaotic flight, but an organized and disciplined movement of the entire community. Success depended on the coordinated actions of each member of the tribe. The decision to evacuate was made by a council of chiefs and elders. Their authority was unquestionable, and once a decision was made, no one questioned it. This ensured unity and ruled out any delay that could prove fatal. The distribution of roles was clear and understandable to everyone. Young and strong warriors were responsible for scouting the route, guarding the column, and helping those in need. Women quickly gathered belongings and food and dismantled dwellings in the case of nomadic tribes. Special attention was paid to the least mobile members of the community. The elderly and sick were not left to fend for themselves. Their movement was a common concern, and special means of transportation, such as sleds, were prepared for them. Knowledge of the terrain was crucial. Each tribe had pre-established, proven escape routes and safe places for temporary stops. These could be high hills, caves, or deep ravines sheltered from the wind. The movement was organized and without panic. Experienced guides who knew every stream and every trail led the column. Warriors brought up the rear, ready to repel any threat and help those who fell behind. Food supplies were also part of the plan. Each family took with them the minimum necessary food, such as dried meat or pemmican. In addition, there were communal supplies in case of emergencies. Thus, the evacuation was not just a flight, but a complex social operation. It demonstrated a high level of self-organization, discipline, and mutual assistance. It was these qualities, not technology, that were the main tools of their survival. What I am about to show you was the main rule for survival during a flood. When the big water did come, whether it was a river overflowing or torrential rains, the indigenous peoples had a clear plan of action. Their strategy was based on a deep knowledge of the hydrology of their land and on preventive measures. The main rule was to never settle in a river floodplain for long. Camps and villages were located on terraces or high ground that would not flood even during heavy flooding. This was basic knowledge that was passed down from generation to generation. The nomadic tribes of the plains had a huge advantage. Noticing signs of an approaching flood, they could simply migrate a few kilometers deeper into the prairies, away from the river. Their mobility was the best insurance against the water element. Sedentary tribes who lived by farming also chose their village locations wisely. They settled on high riverbanks, out of reach of floodwaters. Their fields might be flooded, but their homes and people remained safe. If a flood caught a group of people on the move, they knew what to do. They had to find the highest place in the area as quickly as possible, a hill or a ridge. They knew how to identify such places even on seemingly flat plains. Various means were used to cross the raging waters. These could be temporary rafts tied together from logs, or even simple ox hides, which were used to make a kind of boat called a coracle. Experienced swimmers helped the others to cross. After the flood, life quickly returned to normal. The silt that the river left on the fields was an excellent fertilizer, which contributed to future harvests. Thus, they knew how to turn even a destructive event to their advantage. And how did they escape from the wind that could destroy everything in its path? We will find out in the next chapter. Wind was a formidable force on the Great Plains and along the coasts. Hurricanes, storms, and tornadoes could level any structure. Surviving in such conditions required not only sturdy shelters, but also the ability to find natural refuges. For the tribes of the plains, tornadoes were the main threat. When they saw signs of an approaching tornado, people immediately sought out the lowest points on the terrain. Deep ravines, gullies, or dry riverbeds were considered the best shelters. They lay down at the bottom of the ravine, pressing themselves tightly to the ground. This allowed them to avoid flying debris, which was the main danger during a tornado. This simple technique saved many lives. In some areas where tornadoes were particularly frequent, people prepared underground shelters in advance. These could be specially dug pits, reinforced with logs and camouflaged with turf. Such cellars served as a reliable refuge for several families. The conical shape of the teepee also played a role in protecting against the wind. If the storm was not too strong, a properly installed and reinforced teepee could withstand it. It was tied with additional ropes to pegs driven deep into the ground. Tribes living in forested areas used the forest as natural protection. Trees significantly weakened the force of the wind. However, people knew that during a hurricane, it was dangerous to be near old and dry trees that could fall. On the northwest coast, where strong ocean storms were frequent, local peoples built massive houses out of cedar logs. These squat and sturdy structures were designed to withstand the onslaught of hurricane-force winds and torrential rains. Thus, protection from the wind combined both engineering solutions in the construction of dwellings and the clever use of the terrain. Knowledge of the land and its characteristics was the key to survival. For the peoples of the subarctic and northern plains, winter, with its blizzards and extreme cold, was the main annual challenge. Survival in such conditions required special skills, special equipment, and a deep understanding of the laws of cold. Their methods were honed to perfection. The main protection against the cold was properly selected clothing. It was multi-layered and sewn from skins and fur. The inner layer warded off moisture, while the outer layer protected against wind and snow, creating a warm air layer. Footwear, or moccasins, was also of particular importance. It was made of soft leather so as not to interfere with blood circulation and insulated with fur and dry grass, which served as an excellent insulator. Wet insoles were immediately replaced with dry ones. If a severe blizzard caught hunters far from camp, they knew how to build temporary snow shelters. The simplest was to dig a cave in a deep snowdrift. Even such a primitive shelter allowed them to wait out the bad weather, protecting themselves from the wind and frost. A more complex structure was an igloo or quinsy, a dome-shaped house made of snow blocks. Inside such a dwelling, the temperature could be tens of degrees higher than outside. The ability to quickly build such a shelter was a vital skill. In winter, people moved around on snowshoes. This simple construction, consisting of a wooden frame and interwoven straps, prevented people from sinking into deep snow. Snowshoes significantly saved energy and increased the speed of movement. Thus, survival in winter was a science in itself. It included proper clothing, the ability to build shelters, methods of transportation, and food preparation strategies. After the hurricane subsided or the water receded, a new, equally serious problem arose: providing food for the community. Floods could destroy crops, and severe storms could scare away game. For such cases, indigenous peoples had well-developed strategies for ensuring food security. The basis of everything was the creation of reserves. Tribes never lived for today alone. Part of the harvest always went towards creating an inviolable reserve in case of famine or natural disaster. The most common method of preservation was drying and smoking meat and fish. In this form, the products could be stored for months without losing their nutritional value. Dried meat, fat, and berries were used to make pemmican, a high-calorie product ideal for long journeys and emergencies. Agricultural peoples stored their grain and bean harvests in special storage pits. The walls of these pits were burned with fire and lined with bark and grass to protect them from moisture and rodents. A properly equipped storage facility could preserve grain for several years. If their main food sources became unavailable, people switched to backup sources. They had encyclopedic knowledge of edible plants, roots, larvae, and insects. What modern humans would consider unfit for consumption was a valuable source of protein and vitamins for them. Knowledge of which plants could be found after a flood or fire was particularly valuable. Some species, on the contrary, began to grow rapidly on disturbed soil. The ability to find and properly prepare such food saved people from starvation. Thus, food security was achieved through planning, deep knowledge of the environment, and strict principles of mutual aid. The most important test began after the disaster had passed. It was necessary to rebuild homes, clear debris, and return to normal life. It was at this stage that the power of collective traditions and mutual aid was fully manifested. Recovery was not the responsibility of individual families, but a common task. The entire community joined forces to help those who had suffered the most. No one was left alone with their misfortune. If homes were destroyed, they were rebuilt by the whole community. Men went to get building materials, while women worked on processing bark or skins. Thanks to coordinated efforts, new homes could be built in the shortest possible time. Psychological support was no less important than material support. Elders and spiritual leaders held special ceremonies to help people cope with the stress they had experienced. Shared rituals and stories strengthened the spirit and gave hope. Lost food supplies and property were replenished from community funds or with the help of neighboring clans and villages. There was a complex system of kinship and intertribal ties that became more active in difficult times. The knowledge gained from the disaster was carefully analyzed and preserved. Elders discussed what actions were correct and where mistakes were made. This experience became part of the oral tradition and was passed on to future generations. It was this social stability that was the main secret to the survival of Native Americans. They did not face the elements alone, but as a single united organism. This unity was the source of their indestructible strength. We have seen that the survival of indigenous peoples in the face of natural disasters was not the result of magic, but of a complex and wise system. It included a deep understanding of nature, unique architectural solutions, and, most importantly, incredibly strong social bonds. They did not fight nature, but were its attentive students. Their experience proves that technological development is not the only path to safety. Wisdom accumulated over centuries, the ability to live in harmony with the surrounding world, and the willingness to help others sometimes prove to be more reliable than the strongest walls. These are lessons that remain relevant today. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the life and culture of the indigenous peoples of America.